Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Friday Facts, number 377, New Rails. I'm Exterminator, and thank you for tuning in again with me this week. And this one is kind of like the robot one we had a couple weeks ago, where it's like not super flashy, but it's still really good stuff. So the TLDR of this is basically Rails are being improved, both graphically and mostly in terms of their mechanics and how you build them. But there's a lot more details wrapped up in that. So if you want to see those, definitely stay tuned for the rest of this video, and we'll get into it here. So it's written by V. They start off with basically, the question, Rails need change, which honestly is a question I maybe would have had because I wouldn't really think the Rails themselves needed much changing, but now that we actually see in this Friday Facts as we go through it what was changed, I'm really glad they did all this, and I can see why they did make these changes and why they thought it was necessary. So there's basically two annoyances that, two main annoyances you would be encountering that are caused by technical limitations. That basically S-bins are not possible. Two parallel rails would need at least 6 tiles in the perpendicular direction in order to connect. And we have an example here. So we have a straight one here. This one can do it because it's far enough away where you can make that curve, but you can't make just these like little short S-bins here, which I have encountered instances where I want to do that, and obviously it's not possible, which was kind of annoying. So that's one issue. And then signal positions are often very restrictive as soon as curved rails cross any other rail. And this is actually one I encounter even more than this previous example, where building junctions is a lot of trial and error to see if you can signal it properly. And this is a good example. So you have this curve rail, and you might think, oh, well, we can signal here, so we can signal here, but we can't. So this whole section here is basically just one rail block, which isn't like the worst thing in the world as long as you signal the rest of it okay, but it's still an annoyance and still not optimal, right? So they want to fix that. Apart from this, the code of the rail system accumulated some technical debt over time. For example, hard-coded connectivity rules, hard-coded rail planner logic, curved rails being the only entity with multiple bounding boxes, diagonal rails had front and back signal positions overlapping. Boss Kid was more than keen to rewrite large sections of the underlying rail code, as one of the new benefits would be that we could easily define pretty much any rail shape, which is super cool. And we'll kind of see some of that farther down here. This is a prime opportunity to think really hard about solutions. So if they were to update the rail system, it would have to improve all the major problems in a convincing way. So they start with the S-bin here. Adding an S-bin piece sounds like a very simple change. It would be just a special piece which would allow you to offset tracks by 2 tiles. And just to clarify, just because even I reading this, it kind of threw me off a little, but 2 tiles being 2 actual tiles, not 2 rail tiles, because a rail is 2 tiles, you can see here. So just to clarify, when they say 2 tiles, they don't mean 2 rails, they just mean 2 actual tiles, which is 1 rail. So this is basically, these rails would be directly next to each other, essentially, which is just an offset of 2 tiles or just 1 rail width, if that makes sense. Let yourself dream for a moment and enjoy the idea of how beautiful an S-bin like this would be. Exactly. So you can't do this in vanilla. Or in vanilla, you can't do this, period, I don't think now. But as always, when it comes to Factorio, things are never simple. So they encounter a problem here. You can see these are labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All 5 of these directions would need to connect to a single rail piece, which would be right here. And that's currently not possible because at the moment, every rail can only connect at most 3 directions, left, straight, and right. So you couldn't have like these 2 here normally. Adding a special rail piece would either make curves incompatible with S-bins. You could only build one, not both, on the same spot, which would be a technical limitation and unobvious to the player Y, which would cause other issues. Or require 2 more connections, S-bin left and S-bin right, which would mean that rail performance would suffer because of more options, and also that when you manually drive a train, the arrow keys wouldn't really work very well for turning because you can't define do I want this close turn or this far turn when using the arrow key. So that wasn't really a solution. And it even gets worse because adding just a single S-bin special piece would not be enough. Offsetting rails by 2 tiles is nice, but maybe even more important is a 4-tile offset, which would be achievable by building 2 of the 2-tile offsets in a row, but that would be not great. As you can see, this does not look good. And they say, I'm not entirely sure if this needs words, but I believe to a lot of us, this is a nightmare fuel delivered by pixels. Yeah, this is just really bad looking. So this would be, excuse me, this would be not really a good option. So the idea and the conclusion they came to, which is pretty nice, is to split the curve in half, allow opposite curves, so this one and this one here, to connect to each other, and then have basically forming an S-bend and allowing signals to be placed in the middle. Plus, they'd add a half diagonal directions to rails, which could extend the S-bend as much as you wanted. So this is like the half diagonal here that you could do. Or I guess if this were close, you could just connect this half S-bend to this half S-bend. And the other benefit is you can signal in the middle, which is great too. But they say the idea is great and all, but how do we put into tiles, rail shapes, and actual graphics? So the geometry kind of becomes a nightmare here. It sounds excellent on paper, but the one main rule is that even the new rail implementation adheres to is that every connection point has to be located on integer grid coordinates. This is necessary to make rail planner and rail signal positions work reasonably simple. The straight tracks are easy to make, of course, but it's the curves which are difficult when you can only move control points by entire tiles. So they can't go half tiles, they can't have it in the center of a tile. It has to be like on the, basically on the edge of the corners of the tiles. And then they say cutting the curves in half would add control points in places which make it impossible to make the curves look nice. Have a look how jagged the new rail shape candidate curve would be. So basically, this is just an indication here. So you can see this blue line. I wish I could like click out of this maybe, but the blue line there is where it like deviates from the current 1.1 rails, and you can see it's just not super great. It definitely doesn't line up currently because the control points aren't really where they should be. So that becomes a problem. It doesn't look too good. This is in part because there are just too many control points. Since the diagonal triangles are both weird to build with in general and pose a lot of geometrical difficulties, but they were happy to attempt to let them go. Unfortunately, as you can see below, the middle of such a curve would end up in the center of a tile, which isn't allowed. So you can see there that, again, like I said earlier, it can't be in the center of a tile. It has to be like on the edge or the corner of a tile. You can also notice that while the curve is now much smoother in the middle, at the ends it's still a lot sharper than 1.1 rails, which doesn't quite look natural either. So, I mean, I don't personally notice the issue at the ends, but you can definitely see that blue outline does not line up with the actual rail there, so it's still kind of off. This means that we've kind of ran out of options to make a nice curve, or at least with this curve radius. But the solution turned out to be to just make it bigger. So by just a slight increase from 11 to 13 tiles makes a huge difference. The edge pieces are a section of a perfect circle, and the middle control point is on an integer grid coordinate, which you can see right here. And then it just generally looks cleaner. It's a much cleaner curve. The ends look nice. Again, this is where it should be with the control points, and it just makes the whole thing work better. The final shape of rail curve we've settled on is nice and smooth and doesn't need any triangles or any other straight sections in the middle. So that's like the main mechanics part of it and the building part of it. Overall, I like this. I see absolutely no negatives with this. It just makes the rail building easier. Being able to do S-bends like this and stuff, or even like this, is just fantastic. This is going to make entries into builds easier, some junctions easier, split offs easier. It just is a really, really great thing. So this does show, though, like how much actually goes into getting this stuff to work. It sounds like a bit of a nightmare, honestly. But then we move into more of like the graphical part of it and a few other things. There's actually one really good kind of hidden gem in here that is just like briefly mentioned in a caption that some people may have missed, that I missed on the first read, that is actually fantastic. So the curve size increase is minimal, but still not insignificant. However, in practice, it's surprisingly not so problematic. For example, T-junction footprint generally remain the same thanks to additional signal positions. So this is what we have now, currently 1.1, and then this is what it would look like in 2.0. You can see there is a difference. Like, it's not huge. Like this, that rail is in a slightly different place and stuff, but overall it's like not crazy. And you may also be noticing the rails physically look different too. Much better, in my opinion. And then we can go down here. It says our toy trains are getting to choose. I love this. From a whole lot of different rail pieces to run on. So there are a ton of different pieces to choose from now, which is super, super nice. We have diagonals, longer diagonals, shorter diagonals, all these like half S-bins, half curves. It's just really great. And we can see some examples here. The new curves and half diagonals allow for much more nuanced shapes, so getting through narrow gaps is much easier. Like doing something like this and like split offs like this and such. Some of this would not really be possible now, and you can just do a lot more variation of things. And we have more example. So here it says building 4-6 tile gaps between track directions is now even more interesting to decide between with two tile gap now being possible. So yeah, you can see these are basically just one rail width apart, and you can actually do this pretty well because you can now make these S-bins properly. And this would be a 4 tile gap, and then of course a 6 tile gap, which I've never, well, actually 6 tile, that would be 3 rails. So sometimes I do build like this. Again, it kind of throws off my brain that this is tiles and not 4 rails. This is 2 rail basically in between. This is 1 rail in between, and this is 3 rail gap in between. But it looks good no matter what, especially the fact you can now do this, which is really great because you couldn't really do that before. And then we go over here, and there's a few things to notice. So there's enough candidate signal positions even when times get desperate. And then also you also notice the rail segment visualization been changed. Now it shows the signal directions, which to me was a little not I shouldn't say not intuitive, but it wasn't quite as obvious as I was hoping it to be. I mean, obviously they can't just like make these gigantic arrows. I think once we get used to it, it'll be fine, or it's just a me issue. But you can see here, like the arrow actually is showing the direction it goes. It's just a little confusing because like this one doesn't, but I think it's just because of the block it's in potentially. But overall, I mean, this is not a bad thing at all. This is definitely helpful. And you can see like there's a lot more rail position or rail signal positions here than you would have had currently in 1.1. So this is super nice. And then we come down here, it's in fact so many signal positions that junctions with 2 tiles in between are a possibility now, which is what I was talking about before, where you can just have like these super close, like this one here, you can have this super close rail and all these curves going in between. You can actually signal it completely and properly. They do say, though, if your Factorio friends have gotten used to 32 by 32 modular rail blueprints, they might not tolerate this. And what they mean by this is, I believe, like when you have a rail blueprint, if you do like lock to grid or the global grid, because chunks are 32 by 32 tiles. So a lot of people will build blueprints and lock to the grid, so it's super modular. It connects perfectly no matter where it is, how many turns you've made, what junctions it's on. It all connects perfectly. But this may throw that off, but still, you could probably remake them. And then we come down here, and they say, speaking of which, the bigger curve radius means that we have 4 tiles in between directions. Now the minimal convenient blueprint module size is 32 by 32 tiles. So they've increased the big electric pole range to 32 to go along with this. And this is that like hidden gem I was talking about. This is actually fantastic because previously big electric poles did not reach 32 tiles. I think it was 30 that they reached. But the point being that they did not reach an entire chunk's worth. So if you wanted, like, you just couldn't have a big power pole on one edge of the chunk and then another one on the other edge of the chunk and have them connect. You'd have to have one somewhere in the middle. But now you can build your, like, especially with like straight rails, you can have your big power poles exactly on the edge of chunks and they will reach perfectly. And this is just fantastic. I love this so much. And just generally, it kind of makes more sense to me that, yeah, these reach a chunk, pretty simple, makes the blueprints nicer, I think. Just really, really great change there. And again, the rails, I mean, the new rails look fantastic. They go more into this down below. You can see some remnants here, basically saying if they rework an entity, they also have to rework the remnants. As a bonus, they also have fuzzy edges now, so when rail remnants end, they don't look as out of place as before. All this looks definitely great. And then we see here, what if I woke you up from your dream since the beginning of the post and told this is reality. So this is crazy that you can do this. I mean, even like it still doesn't seem to me that you could signal this, but maybe you can. But just the fact you can build rails like with these curves and this close is just super cool. If you can signal this, what this means is you can build like super compact stackers. I don't see how you could signal this though. I mean, maybe you could, but like there theoretically shouldn't even be a tile gap here to signal, but I could be wrong. Definitely let me know in the comments if you think differently or know that you could signal this. But man, like, cause this could just be like an entry to a stacker, right? Like you can make super compact stackers. And then this last section here is basically just the graphics process. The graphics, the new rails, are something I'm particularly proud of. Reworking rails for visual improvements wasn't the goal. Nobody was really complaining about the high resolution rails. But can I just say, I really like working on rail graphics. So I took the opportunity to make the rails look better than ever before. And this is actually some serious dedication from V, because this sounds like incredibly tedious. And I mean, I would have given up after like 3 days. But basically, the metal parts are thicker, so they're visible more consistently even when zoomed out. That's one thing we notice, is that the actual like metal rail parts are very clear and consistent, whereas before maybe they weren't quite as much. And then also there's a bunch of fake shadows inside the rails to make them generally look less flat. And this is the main thing I noticed, right? If we just scroll all the way back up to was it this one? Yeah, this one. Like, this is what we have now, and this just looks so much more 3D, I guess, not as flat. Like, this is clearly way better than what we had like years ago before they redid them the first time, and this is not bad, but that's the first thing I noticed. I was like, wow, these look way less flat and more kind of like raised up, as they should be, than this original version. Generally just more clear and defined, and they just look really nice. So V's done a great job on this, and goes into more detail. Like the tedious part is somewhere down here. So they say new issues which the old rails didn't have appeared, especially around combining the rail pieces together, as every single rail can now just fork into 3 other rails. Meaning I, for example, spent literal weeks arranging the wooden tiles bit by bit in a maddening process, but now the offset rail pieces fit together really well. I mean, I would have gone insane like week 1 for sure doing this, but it's some serious dedication. And I mean, it pays off. It looks fantastic. And the thing is, it wasn't just the rails. There was like a falling avalanche of things that needed to be updated to fit the new rails, like rail endings, train stops, all the remnants, rail segment visualization graphics, the graphics and the system for rail signal candidate spot visualizations, rail signals, so many new directions that even the circuit connector, the yellow box, needed new directions, and more stuff. So he does say he's thankful beyond description to Jersey, I hope I'm saying that right, from our 3D artist who bravely handled the entirety of this avalanche, so we can move on to other tasks and retain at least some trace amounts of sanity. So they just kind of can finish up the section by saying they're aware the amount of things we were quite aware of the amount of things that would need changing. Some of it we've already done in the process of updating the rail graphics high resolution in 2016. Some of it were new features added over time, like rail signals and segments, etc. Naturally you'd think this would be an easy process since they already have systems in place. The catch is their quality standard also keeps increasing as they find more things to improve, so this entire process took literal months, which is kind of crazy to me and is a bit of, I guess I could say, an eye-opener as to why the expansion is taking so much longer than we thought. Like, if working on rails and rail graphics took multiple months, this is just a tiny piece of the expansion. Obviously, they have a whole team doing different stuff, but like, this is a thing I think that's been discussed either in a Friday Facts or I've discussed with people before, where it's kind of just this trap of like, and it's kind of the same trap you go into when playing Factorio. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but the fact that like your expectations and your standards are always increasing, like you're always just finding ways to improve, and you're kind of just in this continuous cycle of like not settling on something where you're just like, oh well, this can be better, this can be better, this can be better, and it's just kind of an over and over thing. Again, this is not this is not a criticism, but I can see, how this could be difficult because their quality standard just keeps going up and up and up because they're always finding new stuff to improve on. I do feel like at some point they kind of just have to settle with with something and be like, yeah, okay, this is good. Now, again, these rail improvements are not in any way bad. These are fantastic. I really look forward to them, and I think it will be worth it. So the last bit here, the conclusion is the Rails are coming as a free update to 2.0, even without Space 8. So again, because I've had multiple questions on like almost every Friday Facts video about this stuff. None of this is coming now, unfortunately. So nothing we're looking at here, nothing we're going to see in Friday Facts all the way up until the expansion, none of it's going to be released with our current version of Factorio. All of this is in the Factorio 2.0 expansion. What the difference is, some of it will be like you have to purchase the expansion to have access to it, and then some of it, like the rail stuff, will just be added to the base game when that comes out, but it won't be there beforehand, unfortunately. So one last note here, which is fairly important, is the new rail curves will be incompatible with the old ones. Save games from 1.1 can still be open and trains will still run on previously built rails just like normal, but you won't be able to construct the old rails at all anymore. So in some future Factorio update, when they decide to drop 1.1 save game compatibility, we will eventually get rid of the old rail shapes completely. So this is just something to note. You can still load, you'll still be able to load your 1.1 games, at least initially, until they completely drop support for it. But, maybe, if you ask me, like 2.0 is a great time to just start a new map and not necessarily carry old maps through. But, you're welcome to. It sounds like they'll still work. You just maybe won't be able to build like new rails connected to your old rails potentially. So that's just something to note. But yeah, that's the Friday Facts, guys. Like I said, not like crazy flashy like the quality thing or the science stuff, but still really good things. Just making like just another system like the robots. It's more robust now, more options, improvements. It looks better, and just really, really great stuff. And also the fact you just get it when the expansion comes out, whether you buy it or not, which is also cool. So I would love to hear your thoughts below on all this. Definitely let me know what you think. If I got anything wrong in like any of my assumptions, definitely let me know as well. And definitely check out the forums and Reddit for any discussions. There's some fun, cool discussions going on there about this. And if you did enjoy, a like is appreciated as well. And if you're new, welcome, and feel free to subscribe to keep up with future content, mod spotlights, and Friday Facts discussions and other stuff. And I can't wait to see what we have next week. So thank you all so much for watching again. I appreciate it. And until next time, I look forward to seeing you all, and do take care.